I don't think I've ever met a more generous people in my life.
Wow.
Like if there is a need on the island that pops up, the amount of money that is given to just love on a neighbor. Now, I'm not even talking within church communities. I'm just talking about on Grand Manan as a whole. I just in my experience, I have never experienced that before until I came here,
Hmm.
and it was ridiculously humbling for me to honestly look out at the culture around me and say, "Man, they might get community better than we do," and that that is either that's either a very humbling fact that God can use to reshape you,
Right.
or you can just keep going on with what you want to do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sowers Podcast. My name is Matt Naismith, and I am your host. On this podcast, we share stories from church planters and leaders who are influencing kingdom movement and impacting their communities. Whether you're a church planter, a pastor in a church, part of a church planting team, or just curious to learn more, our hope is that these conversations inspire you to be a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. If this podcast blesses you, we'd love for you to share episodes and subscribe on your preferred platform. Now, let's dive into our next conversation. Well, welcome, friends, to the Sowers Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode and this conversation. I'll introduce my guest in just a moment. Prior to that, however, I do want to let you know that we'll have this week's episode, and then next week I'll be releasing a recap episode of the last number of conversations that I've had. We'll then have 2 weeks where there'll be no new episodes released, and so that will be the week of Christmas. It's hard to believe we're almost there. And then it will also be the week between Christmas and New Year's. There'll be no new episodes released. So just so you are aware, there will be no episodes released. Again, the week of Christmas, the 24th, which is the Tuesday, which is usually when these episodes are released. And then the following week, there'll be no new episodes, but then we'll get back to new episodes in the new year, 2025. Looking forward to all of the conversations that are going to be released over the coming number of months. And so again, don't expect a new episode the week of Christmas or the following week after Christmas. Well, today I'm excited for you to hear a conversation that I had with John Lamos. John is the lead pastor of Lighthouse Church on Grand Manan Island, which is off the southern coast of New Brunswick. He and his wife Jessie and their 3 children, Adalyn, Olive, and Samuel, are passionate followers of Jesus in Atlantic Canada, rediscovering how to live a life of devotion to the one that they follow. John has a deep desire to see prayer and discipleship to Jesus awaken sleeping hearts to what Jesus called life to the full. In this conversation, John shares his experiences of the generosity and community spirit on Grand Manan. He reflects on how the culture of giving and support among the people has been humbling for him, prompting thoughts on personal growth and the importance of community. Well, without further ado, here is my conversation with John Lamos. Well, John, an official welcome to the Sowers Podcast.
Oh man, it's a gift to be with you, Matt. Really, it is.
John, I would love for you, we're going to get to your ministry and where you're serving, but I'd love you to just give us a little bit of a 10,000 foot review of your life, coming to know Jesus, and then your ministry assignment to where you are now, and then go ahead and just explain to us a bit where you are. It's very unique.
Goodness, man, that is a story still in the telling, which is beautiful. So I grew up. I'm a pastor's kid. Both my parents are pastors. My grandfather was a district superintendent in our denomination as well. So it's man, though I'll be honest, Matt, the one thing I didn't want to be doing and ran away from for a very long time.
As
And
is
oh
often the
gracious,
case.
but isn't it so beautiful
Mm,
that, you know, to discover the pursuing love of God? Like we so
mm,
often will talk about our pursuit of God, which is huge, but it's like, I think something I read recently from St. John of the Cross was, um, even in your hunger and pursuit of God, he said something along the lines of, there's something you must understand. And he gets very serious. You
Hmm.
must understand this fact. You better believe God is pursuing you all the more.
Wow.
And that desire within you to even begin the pursuit of God is actually God's doing.
Hmm.
And I think that has just been so much my story through the ups and downs of yeah, even before understanding a call to ministry and how I experienced that. It was needing to allow maybe the obligation of others or the fear of disappointing others to really fall off of me,
Hmm.
and to just discover outside of being a pastor's kid or whatever is eh, God longs for me to know him and to be fully known by him. And that was kind of that raw place of
Hmm.
encounter for me, as a young adult, around 19 or around 19 20. It just kind of hit rock bottom in some stuff, and it was, God, I've got nothing left, and so I'm tired of running, and
Hmm.
and since that moment, it's been gracious ups and downs all along the way. But I just knew, through a lot of humbling experiences of, again, still trying to grasp at my own life for control, that, man, God, when I live in saints of old would talk about an abandonment to God in love,
Hmm.
or a union with God in love. When I stop and allow myself to be in that place with the Father, that's where peace rests. And that's salvation to me, so much so that leads into eternity. But it's beginning to understand that encounter here and now, the kingdom here and now, that I just got lost in. And then that just kind of, I think, progressively took me into rediscovering a call. Like, God, this isn't something I have to run away from. This is something I must embrace.
Wow.
And when the more and more I've done that, the more and more I've kind of, to use the terminology of the true and the false self a little bit, I think that's been, oh God, you have made me this way from the beginning. And so I'm gonna start to rest into that. And so that journey started for my wife and I, at King's Church in Quispamsis, which is my home church. Um, which then, and right at the beginning of the pandemic, I think everything shut down March,
Yep.
March 2020, man.
Yep.
And in July of 2020, we were on the island. Our second little one, Olive, was only 6 weeks old, and we didn't visit. Um, we didn't even know the parsonage that we were going to move into until we pulled in the driveway. And it was just one of those things where the Spirit interrupted our story quite profoundly in a very unexpected way. And, it was interesting when we got the ask, like, would you come to Grand Manan, uh, and be assistant pastor at Lighthouse Church, originally doing worship. Um, is rural New Brunswick, Matt. It was like, we wanted to get out of rural New Brunswick, and we were going deeper into it. Was kind of the ask. And Jessie, my wife, was so much more ready than I was. I had to really, God was doing a real death to self work in me,
Hmm.
but I couldn't leave it alone. I could not leave it alone. It was about a month later. I said, "Okay, tell me more. I can't ignore it." And so eventually, we just said yes, because the Spirit was just so on it. God was so weaving things together, and so we came. And it's been a lot of journeys of up and down since then. Lots of learning. I think I am learning more and more what it means to be a lead pastor, and the cost of that, more times by failing and remaining humble and learning along the way, usually by doing it wrong,
Hmm.
and then learning, wow, God, grace is actually leading me here, which is, yeah, that's a hard journey.
Hmm.
That's a hard journey.
I'm wondering if you could share some details in there. So you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
serving. Were you serving
yeah.
in a staff position at King's
Yes, I
Church
was.
where you were?
Yeah, yeah. I
And
was at
then
a. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was at one of their locations as a worship associate pastor at one of their locations in St. John.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
how did Lighthouse contact you? I'm assuming they
Yeah.
figured there's a guy
Yeah,
over
we're
there.
friends. Yeah. Like friend reached out to me. Just kind of Hail Mary request, like any chance
Right.
you'd be interested in coming. And I think I immediately said, heck no.
Right.
I was not subtle. I was like, there were no, we're good. Um, and it was just a network within our denomination, and Lighthouse Church, Matt, it's a really beautiful journey. It's three churches that were very like in the same denomination, but very different, unique, scattered in on the island.
Right.
That before I came, the story was that we were going to blend together as one community. And so I joined in as assistant pastor right within that time, maybe several years before that, the story had begun. And we had joined together and we were waiting to go into our new building. And that's when I joined on staff, not as lead pastor at that point, but as associate pastor.
Okay. Now, when I think of this island life, so I'm going to get you to
Yeah.
describe a little bit more to our
Yeah.
listeners. And, the initial call and ask. My family was watching Klaus, if you've seen the animated movie Klaus, and there's this
Yeah.
island called Smeerensburg, and it feels like it's like off in the middle of nowhere, so
Yeah.
far from
Yeah.
everything else. So
Yeah. It's true.
is that somewhat of a description of
Yeah. Oh,
Grand
gracious.
Manan?
If you go and look at Google Earth, Matt, you'll look at New Brunswick or whatever, and you just keep zooming in because you're trying to find it. And then finally you do, and it's like this little blip right on the like southern end of New Brunswick. We're actually closer geographically to Maine than we are to New Brunswick. And it's an hour and a half ferry ride to the island, and then you're here. Like there's no, oh man, I think I'd like to just go do something a little earlier than the boat schedule. If there's a storm and it's blowing hard and there's swells crashing against the boat, it's not running. And
Hmm.
you're here, like you're here. And the population is between 2,500 and 3,000 people. Um, and then during tourist season in the summer, that basically doubles to between 5 and 6,000 people, just almost overnight. Um, and it was such a paradigm shift, Matt, moving here. Like just there's no chains. It's mom and pop stores, mom and pop coffee shops. There's no McDonald's, there's no Wendy's, you know, there's no third wave coffee shop unless,
Right,
or
right.
that it's just not happening unless you want to make it yourself. Like
Yeah.
that's, you know,
Well, it's interesting because I think as in Canada, when we think about islands that are
hmm
accessible via ferry, right? We think of
hmm
boats going over from Nova
hmm
Scotia over to Newfoundland to get people there, and then probably
yeah,
the most well-known one would be people from Vancouver getting
yeah,
over to
yeah,
Vancouver Island. But
yeah,
we're talking about large populations.
yeah,
In Grand Manan, we're talking about, as you said, 2,500 to 3,000 people. So
yeah.
what is the culture of the church
Mm,
on the island? Like as you got there, you said there were three congregations that
yeah,
amalgamated, came together to form Lighthouse
yeah.
Church. What is the
Mm.
spiritual climate like on this island?
Oh man, it's amazing. I think Pete Hughes said, it's a pastor in the UK, said your destiny is often hidden in your history.
Hmm.
And there are church buildings, Matt, all across this island. Like there's church buildings across this island, and there are stories of, and it's not even that long ago, like maybe a couple generations ago at the most, of it's stuff you would read about. The Hebrides revival happened right here on Grand Manan. Like
Wow.
fishermen would not go out. Fishermen wouldn't go out on the water, which is unheard of because there was a prayer meeting happening.
Hmm.
And there were like teenagers and young adults banging on the doors of the church. It- Like it's very real. And yet so many of those church buildings that sprung up in those times are very vacant now. And that's not even that far away in our history, and but 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 there is a sense of hope, Matt. Like there is this, there's a hunger, like, God, we have seen you do mighty things here. And we're just, I think Mark Sayers talks often about like the wave goes in or it comes in and it goes out. We're
Right.
really in a time of the wave is in, like like, and it will go again. But you're in the midst of like you're in the waiting of, like, just that anticipation of, I know things are dark, I know hope may seem small, but oh man, that's in that moment where it could be easy to turn back.
Hmm.
Like that's the moment maybe to move on, or that's the moment to say, maybe it just won't happen. But it's like, oh, I think that's right. I wonder how often we miss the fruit if we were to just remain there and
Hmm.
wait. And so the spiritual atmosphere and the environment, Matt, on the island is, for those who are hungry and those who have remained, like, it's powerful to be pastoring some generations who have seen moves of God in the past.
Yeah.
Like, there's a nursing home full of saints,
Hmm.
and I'm not kidding.
Hmm.
And we were just there Sunday doing like our round of the services, and I'm looking out at, like, some people are so fully there, Matt, just in the spirit. So, and then there's other people that they just don't even know where they are, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm just like, I am surrounded by people who have contended in the very seasons I am now contending.
Wow.
Stay the course, and so you see, like in any downtown of a large city, there's a whole generation not in the church for the most part.
Hmm.
I don't think being in a rural town or a large, like, urban context city center, the same dynamic, especially in Canada. It's like, we are a very liberal nation at large, no matter where you are, and then add social media and everything else to the mix.
Hmm.
Like, you can move to an island where you think you're hiding from certain ideologies, and
Right.
oh my
Right.
goodness, what an illusion!
Hmm.
What an illusion that is,
Yeah.
and so, you know, but yet at the same time, a hunger arises, Matt. Like, we are just, even in the last number of weeks, last month or two, we're just seeing an increased hunger in young families on our island. I need a place for my kids that is not this environment, or, I'm coming out of an addiction, or I'm coming out of just this place of losing hope, and I don't know where to go. So I think I'm going to show up on a Sunday morning and just,
Hmm.
like, we're seeing new families in our church gatherings and in our community every week. And they're not just coming for a quick visit, like, they're
Hmm.
staying and they're planting themselves here. And it's just like we didn't offer any new programs, Matt. We
Hmm.
we we didn't do this brand new initiative to make sure we lure new families in. No, they just come and are hungry.
Yeah.
But isn't that so? The culture we're in right now
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
like, something's broken and it's not working, and my soul is hungry. So maybe I'm going to go to a wisdom I once forgot,
Yeah.
and I'm going to go back and find some living water. And I think we're just seeing that, but it's slow. Like, there's not 500 new people every week. It's a family here, and it's, a set of grandparents here, and
Hmm.
but just seeing that, as, man, that is beautiful growth and deep growth.
Hmm.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's totally my negligence, but it has to be a very unique place.
Mm. Yeah,
So as you've gotten
yeah,
to know the community, the
yeah,
island, how
yeah.
has it then shaped your approach to ministry at Lighthouse? Like
Mm.
I'm just
Yeah.
I'm just doing the mental, experiment of, okay, you move somewhere like that
Yeah.
island, and you're like, oh, a lot of times we just take the ways that we've
Yes.
engaged and
Yes.
done ministry
Yep.
in the
Yep.
past. We're like, I'll just do
Yep.
it here.
Yeah,
But
I
then you
know.
get
Yep.
there, and I have to
Yep.
imagine it's just so different in many
Yep.
ways. As you said,
Yep.
there's similarities as far as culture. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
that's the impact of globalization and the internet,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you still have a very unique culture. So how has it shaped how you approach ministry there?
Mm. I think, you said a word in there that I think, just as I was thinking about our conversation, um, I think leaning into community it's vital. Um, I think something that really continues to blow my mind here, Matt, is how much Grand Mananners have each other's back.
Hmm.
And I'll be honest, especially outside the church. I don't think I've ever met a more generous people in my life.
Wow.
Like if there is a need on the island that pops up, the amount of money that is given to just love on a neighbor. Now, I'm not even talking within church communities. I'm just talking about on Grand Manan as a whole. I mean, just in my experience, I have never experienced that before until I came here,
Hmm.
and it was ridiculously humbling for me to honestly look out at the culture around me and say, "Man, they might get community better than we do," and that that is either that's either a very humbling fact that God can use to reshape you,
Right.
or you can just keep going on with what you want to do. And but I think, I'm programs are huge. Like we have kids programs, we run Awana, we run youth, we've done Alpha in the past, and we've had, topic study nights and nights where we go deeper. We've called them those deeper nights. Like, I'm not saying running programs is not key, it is. But oh my goodness, like I think I've come to a place where if I don't learn to know people and enter into the vulnerability of community, even as the lead pastor of the church,
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to miss a whole life invitation on Grand Manan. And it was just something I think I really stumbled into. Because I'll be honest, Matt, I stepped into being a lead pastor very green. Like the I was here for about 6 months as associate pastor, and then or assistant pastor, and then the request came to me, "Hey, the lead guy's moving on, and that's awesome. Celebrate him, love on him. Do you want to do it?" And, and I was like, "Oh, wow." But it was just the call and the weight and the mantle fell on me so quickly that
Mm.
I had to say yes. But there wasn't a lot of experience of teaching and leading in my life up to this point. It was very, very much trial by fire. And there's been so many lessons learned in just the 4 years I've been here already. So many, especially relationally. Um, but I think something that the Lord has just done in my heart is lead from vulnerability.
Hmm.
And that sounds really good until God's like, "Hey, talk about that.
Hmm.
Talk about how I've done this in you." And it's like, "Oh, I don't." You sure? You sure I should? And but I think that right there, Matt, has been the sweet spot where we've seen so much fruit in our community as a church is entering into kingdom community. And I'll add there something we're doing in our church right now, just revisioning a lot of things about who we are as a church, and kind of the conversation around rule of life, and just
Hmm.
like what is membership. It's like I align mentally with all of these things, and yet by practice I might
Yeah.
see you once every 8 to 10 weeks. It's like, okay, well, are we really embodying what we have said that we have committed our lives to? So we're just really the slow work of looking at all that stuff. And one phrase that keeps coming to us is a covenant kingdom community.
Hmm.
It's like we actually
Yeah.
covenant with one another in Christ to live as a kingdom community. You can say kingdom community, and that's fantastic and beautiful. And I think that's not wrong, but I wonder if it's incomplete, where you've got this covenant together, but that requires humility, and that requires surrender, that requires
Yeah.
and that has just been like watching reconciliation happen, Matt,
Hmm.
in the community, like three churches coming together as one.
Hmm.
You better believe there were casualties.
Yeah.
And to watch the Spirit do a deep work of humbling amongst every party and saying, hey, I could hang on to this and I probably have a right to. But for the namesake of Jesus and his kingdom, will you forgive me?
Hmm.
Or I accept your forgiveness and I love you, brother or sister. And that, Matt, has been some of the greatest and most powerful fruit. But I think that comes from identifying a key dynamic in the beginnings of the church, even in Acts chapter 2, 42 through 47. We love that,
Hmm.
and it's beautiful and it's good. The beginnings of the church was colorful. It did
Hmm.
it was not mess free. But I think they got the necessity of kingdom community because they didn't have anybody else.
Hmm.
And I think that has been a real value of ours, Matt, is okay, so we get community well on Grand Manan. Okay, so what could that look like in the name of Jesus? What could that really look like in the name of Jesus? And looking at the needs of our community, like very truly, Grand Mananers love taking care of one another. And usually all of those needs are also things that break the Father's heart. You know,
Hmm.
there are kids at our public school right now who just do not have the proper resources to eat a healthy meal, let alone any meal, some of them.
Hmm.
And so we've just today, actually, in the time we were recording this conversation, we just started a lunch, or we with a couple other organizations and Place Action Ministries here on the island are starting a hot lunch program at the school.
Hmm.
And so it's like, you better believe kids going hungry breaks the Father's heart.
Yeah.
And so if we as a church are over here doing our church thing, and then Grand Mananers were over here actually helping Grand Manan, something's wrong with that
Hmm.
order. Like, if the church is understood as a peculiar subsect who are detached from the actual ground of Grand Manan, I think
Yeah.
we've missed the key invitation of Jesus. And so the more that we can see those needs and actually meet them in a kingdom heart, oh my goodness, it's just. But again, it all comes down to community again. Like,
Yeah.
no man is an island here.
Friends, we'll get back to my interview with John Lamos in just a moment. Prior to that, however, I want to let you know about the pastorate. Together, we're building the church of tomorrow today. The pastorate comes alongside pastors in Canada to strengthen their heart, skill, and vision to equip them for a lifetime of faithful, vibrant ministry. Their aim is to strengthen pastors to navigate the complexity of real-world ministry through a comprehensive approach that includes mentorship and friendship, practical resourcing and training, and a supportive community to run the race with. The pastorate is a companion seeding hope and courage as you seek to faithfully serve Jesus and his church in Canada. If you want to learn more about the pastorate, then you can visit thepastorate.ca. Once again, that is thepastorate.ca. And now back to my interview with John. Do you think that because of the population, the size, is the church, like a Lighthouse Church and other churches, be more exposed, like with that reality. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
Mm,
I'm just trying to imagine, like, if a church is in the middle of a
mm,
population of 2 million
yeah,
people,
yeah,
um, and there's a challenge in the neighborhood, if there's a challenge in the
yeah,
community, the church in some ways is kind of invisible. Like,
yeah, yeah.
is there a greater visibility when the population size is that way, that if you don't participate, it's like, well, that Jesus people
Oh,
are supposed to
gracious.
be about helping needs, but they're really not doing much.
Oh man, listen, I think that is, and I love that question because I think that's even causing me to just even reflect on that even more deeply because it is true. Like, so think about the ratios here for a second. Like 2,500 to 3,000 people. Our church right now on average is, around 130 people. Percentage wise, that's pretty big
Yeah.
per population. Like that's big. And like our youth ministry can have between, oh my goodness, Matt, between 20 and 40 or plus kids on one night.
Yeah.
And
That's
there's
huge.
less than, that's huge. And so if we're just doing our own thing and living within some sort of ego driven, look how cool we are in our building, you're living in a glass house.
Yeah.
And so I think, and even for us as a ministry family, like Jesse and I and our three kids, we live in a glass house. And I think that's not a bad thing
Mm-hmm.
because it requires us to ask the deeper questions as the ministry family. Do we follow the way that is Jesus?
Mm.
Or do I do something on a Sunday? Am I impatient at the grocery store? Am I, you know, irritated at the person tailgating me down the road? Because you better believe they know my van.
Right. Right. And
And it's
they
like,
may follow you another time, or you might follow them.
and it's like every moment is a moment for me to follow my rabbi. And so I think, and even for us as a ministry family, like Jesse and I and our three kids, we live in a glass house. And I think that's not a bad thing
Mm-hmm.
because it requires us to ask the deeper questions as the ministry family. Do we follow the way that is Jesus?
Mm.
Or do I do something on a Sunday? Am I impatient at the grocery store? Am I, you know, irritated at the person tailgating me down the road? Because you better believe they know my van.
Right. Right. And
And it's
they
like,
may follow you another time, or you might follow them.
and it's like every moment is a moment for me to follow my rabbi.
Mm.
And that, I'll be honest, Matt, like that's been a new journey for me in the last number of years of just, I'm going to put every lens of my life, what I watch, what I listen to, what my thought life is like, what do I spend my leisure time doing? All of these things, Matt, they're forming me, they're forming us into a certain kind of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and in a small place like this, it has its challenges in other ways, but you're on display all the time. But I think that's also an incredible invitation. Like imagine, like, okay, so if we are on display all the time, oh goodness God. So may we
Mm.
burn bright. May we be a city on a hill then.
Yeah.
Like, let's not be intimidated or afraid of that. Let's let the purifying presence of God then make us a city on a hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just been, doing an end of year give where we focus on one, taking care of the mortgage on our new building and feed like into our feeding program and into our next gen ministries. Like it's what can we give away and how can we free ourselves up from a mortgage so that we can even give more away in a community that is greatly in need
Mm-hmm.
versus upgrade this and let's upgrade that. It's like, we've got everything we need.
Mm-hmm.
What what would Jesus be doing right now on Grand Manan? He'd be building a covenant kingdom community in a place that community has already done really well. Let's give it an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if this was done in the name of Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And we've just watched people come to life in the spirit, in the life of Jesus, because they're looking for that community anyway. But then when they find the anchor of saving divine love at the core of it,
Mm-hmm.
actually healing people
Yeah.
and healing families and generational stuff of addiction and everything else, it's like, oh, I thought I knew what community was like.
Mm-hmm.
But oh my goodness, you add Jesus at the root of that. And we start living into the prayer, your kingdom come, your will
Mm-hmm.
be done here.
Mm-hmm. So as you think about the
Hmm.
future, you came in
Mm,
2020,
mm,
your role
yeah,
shifted pretty quickly after that.
yeah,
You've been over
yeah.
the last few weeks, as you said, kind of revisioning, maybe putting some
Mm,
language to what you imagine the future could look like.
yeah.
What is that future? What do you see happening
Mm,
through Lighthouse
um,
Church in the coming years?
I think it's great. You're asking that at a really special time because we just came out of a whole fall vision series, really of really laying out the vision of following the way of Jesus together. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
just that's very common language right now. It's even a trendy way to speak right now. But you really start actually taking the words of Jeremiah when he says, "Stand at the crossroads and look." And or the Father says through Jeremiah, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you'll find
Mm,
rest for your soul." And then you hear Jesus say, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find what? Rest for your
rest.
soul."
Yeah.
Hey, wait, Jesus, you are the ancient path. And so, for me, it's been asking those questions like, okay, so Jesus, what did you actually invite your followers into? And really what we're learning is making what is so often kind of the baby steps of following Jesus that we often just move away from really quick for the purpose of doing something more flashy. Like, do we live a life of prayer?
Mm,
Are we rooted in the word? Do we live in King Covenant Kingdom community with one another? Are we devoted disciples to our rabbi? And it's been digging into that language, Matt. And honestly, it's going back to, for me personally, it's going back to a lot of saints and sages of old that honestly, in a far more Protestant background, I just did not know existed.
yeah.
But I go and look at some, third and fourth century, Desert Fathers and Mothers, some of the beginnings of like first few centuries of the church, and then all throughout church history. People have been asking this question for thousands of years. In our moment of, progressive ideology or sexual understandings of identity and who I am and all of those things, yes, that can feel intimidating, but the powerful beauty of church history is we don't have to actually go after anything new.
Mm,
It's actually very ancient.
mm-hmm.
And it all starts with, am I in loving union with God?
Mm-hmm.
Have I actually cultivated a life where I am actually in union with God, keeping in step with the Spirit, as it says in Galatians 5? Am I keeping in step with the Spirit as my actual life?
Mm,
Like in real life. So really, like our Sunday morning teachings and our discussions and all that entailed is actually, how do we, one phrase we like to say right now is, how do I get this into my bones? Like how,
mm,
how does the life of Jesus actually be the blood rushing through my veins? And I think that is actually a far more stripped down view of discipleship,
mm-hmm.
where it's living in community with one another. It's
Mm-hmm.
getting up in the morning, and I'm not going to turn on my phone until I plant myself in prayer and in the scripture.
Mm-hmm.
I might make a prayer rhythm. I'm gonna do morning, midday, and evening prayer, or I'm going to Sabbath. And again, these are all like a resurgence of spiritual formation, which is powerful and good, but it's not self-help. It's
Hmm.
how available do you want to be to the life of the Spirit?
Yeah.
And so that for vision as a church, it's digging into that stuff. It's looking at what has always been essential, but we oftentimes forget for the sake of progress.
Hmm. Well, and it's inviting people, if they are already
Yeah.
followers of
Yes.
Jesus,
Yep.
to recognize the reality that is already true of them, right? As Paul
It's
says in
yes.
Galatians 2:20,
Yes.
for I have been crucified with Christ. It's
Yeah.
no longer I who live, but Christ who
Yeah.
lives in me, right? So Christ is
Yeah.
at work in them. So you're simply, I think, inviting them to the way of Christ that
Yeah.
is that is that
Yeah.
is I think going to help them feel most alive, because
Yeah.
Christ
Yeah.
is in them, wanting to live through them in that sense, and walk in his ways.
And actually get the clutter out of the way
Hmm.
to actually be like, yes, like, do you already know? Like, you have died
Mm-hmm.
and your life is actually now hidden in Christ with the Father.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, let's actually live knowing that is true. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and I think that's where a lot of that vision came from, is seeing a very churched congregation doing a lot of stuff, but like, man, this easy yoke thing doesn't really
Yeah.
feel like it's happening. And so it's like, okay, so then let's stop and
Mm-hmm.
ask the question, like, who are we actually becoming? And getting back to, like, again, the wisdom that we maybe forgot.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like reverse engineering. It feels like sometimes, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
wait, let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. And the more we do, it's like, hey guys, I think there's water here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there are streams in the wasteland right here. We're not moving. Like, this is where we're
Mm-hmm.
staying. And to watch the ache arise in people. This is what I
Yeah.
was hungry for, but I didn't know how to articulate it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just to say the heavy cost of that though, Matt, is it had like, it's the Pete Scazzero line, right? Like, so go as goes the leader, so goes the church.
Hmm.
If that's not my life, Matt, I'm just a sales pitch of something I've never tasted.
Yeah.
And so what I have learned, and this just tends to be the way I am learning, the Lord leads me, is,
Hmm.
John, I'm going to do it in you first, or at least I'm going to begin this work in you humbly, and then I want you to invite people into it too. But that wasn't Matt. That was not, hey God, this sounds like a great formula. Why don't we try this? It was just
Mm-hmm.
like, Spirit, I think that's what you're doing. Okay, I'm gonna listen to that. And I just watch the fruit come from that.
Mm-hmm. It's
Yeah.
interesting that you bring that up, because I think about times when I've been asked by pastors and others, hey, when you were doing sermon planning and
Mm,
prepping for like the year ahead, where did you go? And there were certainly like
yeah.
aspirational
Yeah.
series of teachings
Yeah.
that I want to go to.
Yeah.
Um, but it was often like, man, what is God doing in me in this season?
Yes.
And could that have been an invitation, these desires that God has given me, to then become the deposit in the community? And you don't obviously want it
Yeah.
to be fully driven. Maybe someone would say, and be like, oh, that's egotistical. The church's
Sure.
future is based
Sure.
upon what's going on always in you. And so I
Mhm.
think there can be some balance, but I've typically felt traditionally that if the Lord is doing something in me and he's positioned me to be
Mm,
leading this community in this season, then certainly those two things go hand in hand. And probably the thing that I'm going to get most fired up about is
mhm.
experiencing and
Oh yeah.
sharing the things that he's doing in me, which ultimately will bless the community, rather than just being busy and um,
Yeah.
busy in other concepts that may have some value, but is it where your heart is?
I think that's so true, Matt. And I agree with you. I think there's a balance there, right? Like, it's just like, as a lead pastor, I'm now just going to bare my soul to you every Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
as like, right? Like, but there is such, I think, a mix between the balance of Spirit, like, Holy Spirit, you're doing this invitation in me now for the sake of others.
Yeah.
And I think that is just, and how raw and transformative is that, Matt, for us as pastors to say, here's my most recent wounds and scars from this very thing. So why don't you come join me in
Mm.
what the Spirit's doing versus I'm up here, y'all are down here,
Yeah.
and let's see if you can do your best to reach me. Like, oh my goodness, who
Mm-hmm.
wants to follow that guy or that
Mm-hmm.
girl? Like it's like, no, I'm right here. I'm in the trench with you because I've grown up in the same culture as you did. So I've been formed in the very same ways as you. I have the very same struggles as like it's
Yeah.
like we have such a great high priest who understands, who was tempted in every way as we were. Like that is to really allow your heart and your mind to wrap your word like around those
Yeah.
words. It's really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But let's boldly approach the throne of grace and our what if that was the call of pastors right now?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, why don't we all go boldly approach the throne of grace together in our time of need?
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's a beautiful picture.
Well, and it's so tempting, and I think so many, and I think it's a lie of the enemy to
Yeah.
say, "Oh, no one else understands what I'm
Uh-huh.
going
That's
through or
right. Yeah.
experiencing."
Yeah.
But then that ultimately can create a grievance with the Holy Spirit. But at the same
Absolutely.
time, it creates a gap between ourselves and the people that God has called us to love and to care and to shepherd and walk
Yeah.
alongside.
It's
So to
true.
say, no, let's boldly approach the throne of grace together, not
Yeah.
me first, and then, oh, now I watch all of you. We are
Yeah.
actually
Right.
going on this journey together to the one who understands, because he
Yeah.
does
That's right.
get it. He does
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Can you share with us, maybe you just speak to it from your own life or a
Mm.
story from your community of transformation that has impacted you? Just as we close,
Mm.
share with us a story of
Mm.
encouragement or transformation from someone in the community, or as I said, it could be yourself that's shaping a big
Yeah.
impact in your life.
Well, I think to go even just go with what you said, there's a very recent friend of mine who um you know parents, grandparents had some roots in the church, but he and his family not really. And um it was one of those teachings again, Matt, where it was like, whew, okay, vulnerable moment here, and he just happened to be there that Sunday morning after reaching kind of a rock bottom moment, in his life, and just, made a decision that morning to just surrender all to Jesus for the very first time. This was just in the last
Hmm.
month.
Wow.
And it's kind of like one of those guys that was there, and it's like, what is he doing here? Like, I mean, this is awesome. Like, I'm so happy you're here, but please tell me, how did you get from point A to point B, please? And and so that night I was like, I'm gonna reach out to him and connect with him, but he beat me to it, and he reached out to me and just said, I don't know how this works, and it was just perfect because he didn't have any of the Christian language to put to his experience, which was
Yeah.
just phenomenal.
Yeah. The
It was
best.
so raw, Matt. And he was just like, it's like everything that happened this morning was catered for me. How did you know I was coming? And I was like, I didn't know you were coming. That's just the goodness. Like, what if that whole morning was just for him?
Hmm.
That is how great the love of God is. That's how
Yeah.
scandalous and outrageously perfect and true and right his love is. Like, he would cater a whole morning to one person
Hmm.
if he wanted to. And so it's just watching the transformation and freedom and healing work God is doing in you. God used that to grab someone else by the heart
Hmm.
and do the very same thing in them. And you have
Hmm.
no idea. You just get up to teach what God is laying on your heart. And you're like, I don't know. Here we go.
Hmm.
And then it's just like 2 + 2 = 3,000. Like, you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't add up other than the kingdom.
Hmm.
That's it. And again, it's a slow work, Matt, but those little stories like that, like a lady came up to me on Sunday and we were in at one point we're in Isaiah 43, and she had her grandmother's Bible, and she opened it up and showed me after. And earlier that morning we had done "It Is Well with My Soul," just very traditional. We just went stripped it way down and it just the room rang out. And that hymn was on a piece of paper in that text. It when peace like a
Wow.
river attendeth my way. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
again, you're caught up in you're in the unforced rhythms of grace, as Eugene
Yeah.
Peterson wrote or paraphrased Jesus's words. And that's just that we're seeing that, Matt,
Mm.
in small relational one-on-one moments so often.
Mm.
And I'm learning to wait in those and just almost glory in them, in awe and wonder. Like, you know, who am I? Who are we on small island Grand Manan, where most people don't even know in Canada that it even exists?
Mm.
And yet God is doing miracles right here,
Hmm.
just like he is in downtown Vancouver, just like he is in downtown
Hmm.
Halifax or in San
Hmm.
Francisco or Portland.
Hmm.
That's who God is. And
Yeah.
we're all in the same story, which is just beautiful. Yeah.
John, this has been rich. Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Thank you for being part of this.
Oh, Matt, thank you. Because it's like something I love that you prayed before we started was, would this actually be something where, John, you get to reflect? And I've been able to do that
Hmm.
and remember, man, God, look what you've done in 4 years.
Hmm.
And just to encourage any like rural, especially isolated pastors in Canada right now, you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. It is so, Matt, it is so easy to feel no one sees me. I'm doing insignificant things. Um, the people are your work, I think.
Hmm.
Like your love for them and your exuberant heart, even if it might not feel like the dream you thought you were going to have. Don't miss the wonder of what's right in front of you, because God has you there for a reason right now.
Yeah.
And it's easy to feel isolated and alone. You never know who's waiting around the corner to encourage you if you just had eyes to see it. And I've had to learn that.
Well, friends, I'm sure you'd agree that there is so much from my conversation with John that could be applied as this episode's action step. The thing that I want to focus on, however, is when John talked about the community experience on Grand Manan, as he was willingly sharing the community that people express to one another and the community that they feel amongst one another, the generosity that they express to one another is significant, and it rivals Christian community. Sometimes we as Christians take for granted what we believe is a really strong community, when at times, if we look around us, there are really strong community organizations. And that should humble us, because it means that we're not going to win people necessarily by community, but what we're invited to win people to is becoming a covenant kingdom community anchored in Jesus. And so what I want to ask you to do is to think about your own Christian community, maybe your own church, and how are you becoming a covenant kingdom community anchored in Jesus? Do you have a lot of great parties? If you have a lot of great parties, good. Are you a generous community? Great. But how does your community, how is it any different than the community organizations that someone could be a part of in your city? What makes you altogether unique and different? Now, I would suggest that that difference should be Jesus, and that your commitment to one another is not simply contractual, but covenantal. And so how are you increasingly becoming a covenant kingdom community? And what can you learn from the community organizations around you, both in how to do community, but also what makes you stand out in juxtaposition to them as being a community centered around Jesus? As John said, this can humble us, and therefore we respond out of humility, or we just keep on doing our own thing. And so I want to encourage us to humble ourselves and ask ourselves these important questions as we go forward. As always, friends, thanks for joining us for this week's episode. If this was an encouragement to you, I want to invite you to share the episode now. John deeply influenced me. His simple love for the Lord really stood out to me in this conversation. I will certainly be sharing it. As a reminder, next week we will have a recap episode released where I'll do a little bit of a deep dive in the last number of episodes, and then no new episodes for the Christmas week and then the week between Christmas and New Year's. Thanks, friends. You are loved. We'll talk to you soon.